Good evening, it's 6 o'clock. Welcome to the Plymouth studios of the UK Column. This is a special edition of UK Column Live. Earlier this afternoon we interviewed an exceptionally brave lady in Scotland. We have serious concerns for the physical safety of this lady, and we wanted to be able to put across her story. The interview, which was done a little bit earlier this afternoon, takes us through her story. She's been physically and mentally assaulted, as have her children. She has suffered failings and harassment through the Scottish law system. She has not been protected as she should by the police, and the abuser is still at large. I hope that you will take the time and have the patience to listen through her story, and especially listen to what she starts to say towards the end of the interview, where she makes some absolutely critical comment on what is actually taking place in the so-called Scottish justice system. Once it's complete, we're going to ask for your help and assistance. Thank you. All right, so Elaine, have we got you on the line?
You have.
Oh,
yes.
Okay, excellent. Now, Elaine, you don't sound Scottish, but you're up there in Scotland. Where are you exactly?
I live in a little hamlet called Auchterarder, which is difficult to pronounce, which is south of Perth, sort of 40 miles between Edinburgh and Glasgow, the sort of home of both. Okay,
so you've got a soft Scottish accent, is that right? You're on the posh side.
Well, not really. I think my background is I grew up in East Africa from the age of 3 weeks old, so my accent is just, I guess, a bit Anglified as opposed to posh.
Okay. Well, look, if we start somewhere at the beginning, just tell us a little bit about yourself. What have you done work-wise? You're obviously a mother.
I am. I'm a mother of 2 children. I also was the second wife to a gentleman who was very much involved in business and indeed in PLC companies based here in Scotland. And I, in fact, looked after children, not my own children, my stepchildren, for at least 10 years. And then I had my own children slightly later in life. Although my children would call me a cool mum and a yummy mum, I certainly had my children a bit later. So on the whole, you could say that I, in actual fact, had 4 children.
Okay. And when was life normal for you? If we go back to when everything seemed to be okay and you're living a happy family life, when would that have been?
Could I ask the question, would normal be within my marriage, or my only marriage, or would normal be in before that?
Well, let's. Well, you decide where you think it is.
Okay. Timeline-wise, I spent a good part of my life being brought up in East Africa, in Uganda. My parents were semi-colonial. I come from a background of the farming community on both sides. My father was from the Black Isle, and my mother was a very gentle border lass. And I was born in Edinburgh, and I travelled a lot. And I eventually came up to Scotland because I had a mother who had MS, and I stayed here. And I had various different occupations within Edinburgh and out with, including setting up 2 businesses over the peace. And so some of my early years of not being married, but certainly being away from home, was down in the borders, which is where I set up my business, and those were very happy years. But I made lots of connections in many different areas, whether it's in advertising or publishing or sales, or in fact even one of my first loves was actually doing children's programs for the BBC. And so I eventually found myself down in the borders, living a sort of Felicity Kendall life, if you like, 2 horses, 2 dogs, chickens, organic growing, cottage on top of a hill, just idyllic really, but without children. And my then long-term partner, who was a lot older than I, had a child, of which I was very involved in bringing up. So I would like to say that I go back to probably the age of 23, when I was really very much involved with children. You could say that I've had my own place on for a long time, because I'm now 55.
Okay, and you've produced some magazines, haven't you? Which I think you may have a copy of one of those there.
Yes, I do. I launched, along with a lovely friend of mine, a girlfriend. We our love of horses in the area, very horsey area, but we decided we needed to put together an informative magazine, and we worked in conjunction with the Royal Dick Veterinary College, the well-known teaching college for equine and many other things, but world-renowned actually, and we went about producing the Horse Times, which was a truly informative magazine covering all aspects of the clinical, right down to everyday management or ailments to do or research or whatever. And it was an exciting time, because it was the only kind, and that it was a niche market.
So you've had a really interesting childhood. You've experienced what you describe as an idyllic lifestyle. You've been involved in business. You've had lots of friends. All in all, you're a normal lady. And then at some point, something started to happen in your life, which has ultimately meant that you're now you're in a world now where you're in and out of courts. You're starting to experience the public sector in Scotland not acting normally. There are a number of things which are happening around you. What was it that happened to you that started the path towards where you are now?
Well, I'm afraid, sad though it is to say, and I say this with my hand on my heart, I fell in love with somebody who had, if you like, probably earmarked me while I was working in the city, because I often worked in the city and sometimes I didn't. And so I ended up getting involved with quote merchant banker, a young person at that time who was obviously not much older than me by months. And I married him eventually. I lived with him and I married him. And I had a child about a year into my what would be described now as a society wedding, and that was the birth of my first child, who was my son. And as I said to you before, I already had 2 stepchildren, and those children ended up living with me full time, myself and my ex-husband.
Okay, but when you had those children living with you, and was life still okay then? I'm trying to take you towards a point where something has happened to you which has really changed your life.
Well, I have to say, if I was to look back on it, I was warned by a lot of people in the early parts of my life, but I didn't take any heed, because I think there was this flush of just going with your heart and possibly not your head, but I was warned. And it took me probably into the first 4 months of my marriage, when my son was all of 4 months old, to experience some very big problems.
Okay, and are you able to give us an
Yes,
example of a problem?
I realised that I was with a very formidable family, a family who was used to getting what is one very close-knit and well known in Edinburgh. Certainly my ex-husband is the nephew to a fairly prominent figure in Scotland, and I experienced my first assault, and it was clear through various people around me that that this man was used to getting his own way, and it was, control at its very extreme. but I decided that I could handle that. And I had by that time I had three children, so I soldiered on really. But yes, those are the first times, and that assault it was in the form of, not if I didn't agree, then I was shot down. I ended up having to flee with my child in a walkie-talkie and bolt myself in the bathroom, where my ex-husband set about trying to get into the bathroom by banging the door and leaving the door defaced, of which was witnessed later by my father and other members of our close family, and indeed friends.
So you start to experience abusive behaviour by your then husband, and so just take us in years. How many years ago was this that it started?
I was married in December 1996, sorry. But I had known my ex-husband for some time, and it had been an off and on situation, because he was married, although I was led to believe that he was either separating or separated. So I had known him for some time, on and off, and in fact there was a break period. So I was, in terms of time, my son, as I said already, was 4 months old, but the mental abuse started to take place. And in fact, looking back at it now, I find myself with health problems that were rearing its ugly head, just because I found it difficult to be that, what some people used to describe as lively, bubbly personality. And I found that I was being asked to wear certain clothes. I mean everyday clothes in a certain way. I had to wear my hairstyle in a particular way. In fact, he managed to get hold of the hairdressers who were friends with his to explain in a subtle way that I should have it cut in a certain way. I later realized that this was happening, and that I was really being groomed. And this I found quite difficult to deal with. So the mental abuse increased considerably, but then there started to take we then had a spate of all sorts of incidents, or as I put it, assaults. And there's one particular case where I had just breastfed my child, and we were going to see a fairly people who were well known in the Scottish society for lunch, and en route I happened to just point out we were going in the wrong direction, whereupon my ex-husband took his elbow and dug right into my chest, and I was in such sufficient pain that I doubled over. He stopped the car, I got out of the car, and I was doubled up for a good 40 minutes, where all children, my stepchildren, including my son, who was, I think, about 18 months old at the time, certainly walking anyway, were screaming. They were very upset at what had happened to their mother. I refused to get back in the car. Eventually I did. And thereafter, and timing-wise, I guess you might be talking about 6 months after the incident I mentioned, but there were others that one can't remember, but to degrade me in public, to undermine me, to undermine my intelligence, or expect me to be something that I wasn't. And I think that, so those are just very mild versions of the onset of abuse.
Right, and you tried to deal with this on your own at the time. You didn't actually go to seek help from...
I did not deal with it on my own. I have been very lucky to have some very close friends, but in this process, and as I said to you earlier, I had a wedding that was meant to be a small wedding, and it didn't. It ended up being 400-500 people wedding, with many business people attending, some of whom I didn't know, some of whom I befriended, and in fact to this very day, I'm still in very close contact with. But my own family were very aware of what was happening to me, and my very closest of friends, who some are fairly well and widespread, were being isolated from me, not encouraged to come, dealt with very rudely if they were to even visit. And that was something that I was slightly oblivious to, because I'm a very family orientated person, and I felt the need to want to have the thing I craved most was this, to have a family, and I was blessed at that time with obviously having one child, and certainly wanted another, and that I was going to try my best. And in actual fact, the classic situation is I thought it was my fault.
Right. Now, I know that a lot of people believe that this type of abuse only goes on in households, in deprived households, or households where there are particular pressures, maybe unemployment or maybe drug taking or something. But what you're describing is taking place in how do we describe it? A genteel background. You've got a household where everything that's needed is there, but in that environment there's a very controlling situation is taking place.
You asked me earlier whether other people knew about it. Well, my family were then involved. My younger brother was highly involved. And it was obvious that, the type of behaviour that I was coming across was a sort of almost Jekyll and Hyde. And it was something that I couldn't understand, but it was clear to me that at the time that possibly it wasn't going to stop, but that I had to tread carefully.
Right.
But
Elaine, this behaviour accelerated until it started to become really physical and abusive. I know this is very difficult for you, but are you able to give us an example of what was done to you?
I am. The abuse increased, and I then had a second child. But in that time leading up to that, there were all sorts of extremely nasty forms of psychological control and mental abuse. In fact, it was described to me in one way that it was like having the Russian dolls in the wrong order. It was child-driven, or there are all these cliche things that now I understand so well. But it meant that if anybody to be reprimanded, it was the mother. And I was very conscious that I had already been through a situation with my ex where he had got residence of his first two children, and that I was fed this story, like many of his close people, that in fact there was something wrong with his first wife. And I began to realize that that really wasn't the case. And there were many obvious things that came about, which were, and they're difficult to say on air, but that he was probably not the father of his second child, and which was then verified to me by the first wife, whom I then kept in contact with. I kept her in contact with all the things that were happening to her children, because I could see that she was being blanked out of the children's life bit by bit, from their schooling to their contacts, whatever. And I was the instant mother that was being brought in to look after these two children. And I could see that the situation where I was being dealt with, sometimes in a childlike way. And you asked me one of the assaults. Well, this one is quite hard to talk about, but it's when I decided that I had been asked to sit down. I was in our estate house in the middle of Fife, which is a county in Scotland, the Kingdom of Fife, where we had a small estate. We hadn't done up the main mansion house, and we were in the process of doing it up. It was very much an obsession of my ex-husband to put this in place and run a shooting facility. And I had disagreed with something very minor. And at that point, my ex had lashed out at me and threw me down onto the floor, pushing me around, manhandling me. His foot was on my neck. He pushed me against the wall onto the sofa. At one point, the sofa was on top of me, and I had been a door to escape out into the hallway had been firmly closed. Couldn't get it open. It was a particularly hefty door, and my children were outside. My boy was 5 and my little girl was 3, and I called for help. And eventually, I managed to get to the door after having been thrown around the snug room. And my son managed to come in, and he ran towards the other side of the room to get hold of the telephone. And as he reached to get hold of the telephone cord, he was pushed to the side to the wall, where he slunk down as if he had been thrown to the side. And his father had no remorse at all. And I called he didn't answer, and the little boy just slunk all the way down where he sat, with his back to the wall. I mesmerized while my other little girl was screaming in the background. And at this point, my ex-husband left and departed, only to come back. I don't know whether time went by, 24 hours, 48 hours, remorseful. And I didn't do anything about it straight away, but my family were very aware of all the types of abuse that were going on. And eventually I went to see the doctor and showed them my bruises, and I showed a health visitor, and it's on my medical records. And he insisted that I go to the police, which I did. But I was afraid when I went to the police, because being a middle-class person, what was I going to do? I had 4 children to look after. What did I do? I didn't know where to go. They suggested I go to a refuge, but I didn't know where it was. And I was scared. And it just didn't happen. I had already, by that time, got in touch with my lawyers, my then lawyers, my first lawyers. And when I was going to go for a restraining order, the young solicitor at the time had suggested I do so, but the older solicitor from the firm, it was in Glasgow, by the way, because I'd been told to avoid Edinburgh like the plague. I was told not to go for a restraining order, it wouldn't help me. And I had later realised that the very man that suggested I don't take it turned out to be somebody who had gone to school with my ex-husband, and therefore he was protecting my ex-husband. And that was one of the biggest mistakes that I ever made.
Okay, Elaine, thank you for telling us that. And I know this is very, very difficult for you, but I am sure that as you tell this story, there are going to be other mothers out there who absolutely pick up on what you describe and how you're describing it. Would you be able to tell us, there was another incident that you've recounted to me, which I think was in the courtyard. Are you able to tell us about that?
Yes, it was an 18th birthday party for my oldest stepdaughter, and I was in the process with all the youngsters and trying to put it together. And my ex-husband lost his temper, and it was a makeshift stable because I kept horses for my children and little ponies, and I was thrown to the cobblestones and where I hit my head. And this all came out in the Supreme Court of Session in Edinburgh, and I brought this to the attention of the judge, and then he spat on me, which he admitted to, but then continued to urinate. And and of which he has diluted and will not admit to. He's only admitted to part of that. Okay,
Elaine, Elaine, we know somebody's at the door. I think you should break off. If that's your family that's come back, I think we should just let you break off. Does that mean that your family are home with you now all the time?
It does, but if you wait 1 second, it's fine. It's okay if you don't mind it. So I can carry on. It's fine.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So I'll just bring that in again, Mike.
Yeah, just keep going.
Right. Okay. So so you're pushed to the ground and assaulted and urinated on, and that was all of that actually came out in the Supreme Court of Edinburgh. Are you okay?
Yes.
And what was the judgment from that court case?
The judgment was that I divorced my ex-husband on unreasonable behaviour. In fact, I took the services of one of the best QCs in Scotland. I booked her well in advance, and she wasn't going to put in at that time the major assault because there were many others, and I couldn't go through them all. I just give you 2 examples. And when I gave evidence over 3 days in the courts, because the 2 things that had to be sorted out were the children and the finances, I could see that my ex-husband was more than uncomfortable because the press were there, and a man of his stature and involvement, you know, he did not want anything to come out. So a deal was made, and it went no further. But I was able to talk about my abuse, and the abuse didn't just happen to myself. It also happened to my children. And there was one occasion when he came back from a business trip and arrived in the house and went upstairs to the first floor, and he didn't get an answer from his son. So he went to seek him out. My son they had just both come out of the bath, and he went to my son and he assaulted my son on his head and in his stomach, leaving my son curled up in a kind of fetus position in his bed. And whilst he was doing that, and I went to help him, he went about pushing me down the stairs, or in actual fact dragging me away and pushing me and dealing with me. And I have all this is written down in evidence elsewhere. But meanwhile, while that was happening, my little girl ran across the hallway where she saw this happening, and she obviously was worried for her mother and didn't quite see what had happened. I think she did see what happened to her brother. He picked my daughter up and took her into a room. By this time we were separated, by the way, and I was in a different part of the house. It was hard because we were in just a separate area, just only divided by this hallway. And she and I had shared a room for the simple reason that I felt protected from his sexual advances. And he went about thrashing her on the back of her, just on her back. I don't want to reveal any more than that, where she was blistered. The reason for this is that she had scratched his face because of anger at seeing her brother and her mother being assaulted. And there are other aspects of cruelty to my children, and I have to say, I just don't bear thinking about someone being out with my seeing, but my certainly my daughter has given evidence and spoken about it at great length to a number of people.
Right, and how old was your daughter when she was assaulted?
I think that she was probably, it might have been 2 or 3, 2 or 4. She was, I think, probably about 4.
Right.
I may, this now quite a time I'd have, but she was certainly a little girl. And I know that it's very hard for her because my children love their father very much, so they should.
Right. And so we've got a man who's assaulting you and assaulting children as well. And what was the role of the police? What did the police do to protect you?
There was no protection actually at that stage, other than I was to have gone to well, I did go to the police on the occasion when I was assaulted, in the stables. I went at 12 o'clock that night, leaving my children. I couldn't take them with me, they were fast asleep, but we had 60 odd people there staying. I felt that at least they were safe, there were people around. I went and I gave evidence to the police, so it's all documented.
Right, and which police force was that? I
went to the Fife Constabulary.
Right, and what happened as a result of your reports to them?
Well, their take on it is that because I didn't press charges, and the reason I was frightened was that I had 4 children and I didn't know what the consequences were, that nothing happened.
So Elaine, what did you were uncertain as to what would happen, you got 4 children, you're worried about the children, so you didn't press charges and therefore the police didn't really offer you any protection. Was that correct?
That's correct.
Right. Okay. So if we just move things on a little bit faster then. So what has subsequently taken place? You got divorced. So obviously they're all...
My divorce came through in 2008. It cost me a cool £360,000. I spent with top lawyers, and I have been in and out of court since 2006, with probably, I reckon, about 3 months. I have been dragged in for telephone contact, for defamation, for residence, for contempt of court, it is relentless. And I have been told by many people, captains of industry, friends closely connected, shooting and fishing world, business, people that I know from my marriage and know from before, that this process, or this mission, will continue. It won't stop.
Right.
And
so
I've been through many lawyers, and I have been through one hell of a lot of money, which was supposed to be there to look after my children and the future of my children.
Right. So you're experiencing harassment through the courts. The courts are being used against you. Is that what you're saying to us?
I've experienced extreme legal abuse, and I have to say I can't see any let up at all.
Right. Could you give us some examples of how you feel the justice system has let you down? What have you experienced when you've tried to use a legal team to help you?
Well, Mike, only can I relate to your current situation, which is based on the fact that I'm supposed to have not taken my child for contact on 4 occasions, which is not true. It took me 2 years to get her a lawyer. I've tried so hard to protect her interests. I have found myself having to and use all kinds of evidence to prove with plenty of witnesses. In fact, my daughter was assaulted only just recently in July, and we took it to the police within 5 minutes of it happening with 2 witnesses. We gave statements to the police. We then, my daughter gave evidence, we presented affidavits, and we had statements. I had 2 recordings on my telephone, albeit that I didn't get it on video because I didn't know it was even going to happen. And this was placed in front of the sheriff, and even then I am charged. And the mishandling of my case throughout the last 4 or 5 years, including residencies of my son, my children have been split up. And there are many out there, people who are possibly not involved in my cases, but who find this whole situation and the money and the time and the trauma that it's caused, certainly my daughter and myself, but I primarily put my children first, that it is abhorrent. And I'm told that the legal system really it is not there to protect me. It's there to protect itself.
Right, so a man who has a clear track record of being abusive to you and to the children is actually being helped to maintain access with the children by the courts.
Well, let me put it this way: in Scotland, I think I'm an informed individual, and I have made it my business, because I've had a lot of support to try and bring this to bear. I was told to go down the criminal route, and they didn't see fit to take it any further because I didn't have enough evidence. But what more evidence could you have? I had plenty of witnesses to see the bruises on me. There were 3 doctors. What more evidence could you have? I mean, I had this type of harassment and sexual harassment and mental abuse when I was going in for operations in the hospital. One of the worst incidents that I haven't mentioned was when I was thrown downstairs, and in the process, I've lost a 3rd child, and it doesn't seem to matter at what extent. I just seem to have doors closed on me wherever I go. I've made lots of inroads with politicians, with people in places of authority and who are influential, and I'm afraid that my ex-husband is known for his behaviour, and they know his personality. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people who just do not want to stand up and be counted because of the compromised situation they are in. But this case is well known, and it's a very live situation within the corridors of power, certainly in the legal circles.
And I believe even within legal circles, senior people have said to you that they recognise that what's happening to you is wrong, it's unjust, but they're not able to...
I have been told that, and I've been told that I won't seek justice through the courts, and indeed, politicians, there are 1 or 2 that I've approached and they've done nothing about it at all.
Right.
And there are others who have been, and who are trying to be as helpful as possible, and I'm dealing on a cross-party basis. I'm dealing with justice secretaries. I mean, and I'm not the only one. I know, as this has unfolded over the last 4 or 5 years, I have now come in contact with other women in exactly the same situation. Some far, far worse, where they've actually had their children taken away and are unsupervised contact. I do not want to be in that situation where I become the victim.
Right. Okay. I know you're pressed for time now, Elaine, so I'm going to say thank you very much for talking with us. When you've been talking to me now, and obviously when we've had conversations before, I listened to what you have to say against the background of the other cases that we know are going on in England, Wales and in Scotland. And throughout the country, we are seeing, it's not just the UK column, because there are many organisations and voluntary groups at the moment who are trying to expose the fact that we are seeing a court system being run which is not protecting mothers or fathers who are the victims. It's not protecting the children. It's working to take the children away from parents, and any parents who fight for their children are victimised and or threatened by the state. And we've certainly got mothers who have been there have been serious attempts to section them as a means of actually getting the children away from them. So
what's very scary is that I am told by all sorts of people that the mission here is to extract my children like my ex-husband did to his first wife, and that his modus operandi is to make sure that I have no finances, to destabilize me, and what it is in any way possible to so that he can then gain residence and take the child away, despite the fact that she has been consistent all the way through, and thankfully there is plenty of evidence to show that. But it doesn't stop the situation, because I'm told that unless I go all the way and spend more and more money, that I'm supposed to be able to stop this person continue to do this with the aid of the legal system. And I have people, who within the legal system who are trying to break it. Even though there's a reform, it isn't going to happen because it's self-serving and because it's corrupt. At least that's my view. I have lost all faith when I have people within the system telling me it's never going to work, Elaine.
Right.
I have no protection for my child, even when she's called in distress from her father's house. You know, I was told to present myself at the bottom of the drive, and then I wait there for 3 hours. By that time, my daughter has found herself asleep on a wet pillow. I have had witnesses overhearing her distress. I mean, and even then, the police in Fife just ignored it. In fact, we're still trying to investigate through complaints to the chief constables as to why the charges have never gone any further than just talking about it. But I have no protection. I have 32 incidents of at least 4 or 5 have been in the case of where I've had my tires tampered and punctures. I do not feel in any way protected, either by the police nor by the law, at all.
Okay, Elaine, thank you very much for talking to us. I'm going to, well, I admire you for having the courage to speak out, and I am absolutely certain that what you've said to us this afternoon is going to affect many people. Some of those people, because they're also experiencing it themselves. We are getting, in the UK column offices, 4, 5, 6 calls a week from mothers and fathers that are talking about the absolute failings of the court system, not incompetence, but coming up against a wall to stop people obtaining justice. And for somebody to be prepared to speak out, okay, on audio, as we've got you today, is wonderful, because it's only by people speaking out that we're going to do something about this. So I'm going to thank you for that. I'm going to hope that we may be able to look at some of the other points in more detail with you. And of course, we've already know that there are other cases north of the border that effectively corroborate what you're talking about. So thank you.
I have to say, on behalf of a lot of people I've met on my journey, including a lady just recently of whom I would love to mention her name, and it involves sexual abuse of a horrific kind. And I say to them all that we need this opened up. We need the light shine on every one of us, not just for the sake of women and children, it's for the sake of justice. And we don't have justice in Scotland. It's a mockery.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to Elaine speak about her life and her experiences. I must apologise. I should have announced at the beginning approximately how long that interview would take. For those that are still here with the programme, that very brave lady has just given a fraction of her story, and I really cannot explain the courage that it's taken for her to speak out. While we were doing the interview earlier today, she was receiving silent phone calls. She was receiving further harassment. She's had people on her property. She's had her vehicle interfered with. She has the police now nearly making her vexatious. So if she attempts to get help from the police to protect her in her situation, she has become the wrongdoer. And this is a pattern which we're seeing across the country. This particular incident is in Scotland. We've also got the Holly Gregg case taking place in Scotland, but in England we're seeing similar cases where the police are refusing to act to protect the victim, and ultimately is the victim, whether that is the mother or the father or indeed the children, that are not being properly protected by the police and the court system. And we see the legal teams, be it barristers or solicitors, simply acting to gain the maximum in fees with no real drive to get the truth out and to obtain justice. We did not take the step lightly to put this on as a special programme tonight. The UK column team have been working with this lady for some considerable time. We're very grateful to the help that we've had from the UK column Scottish team. We would also like to give special thanks to those policemen north of the border who've been brave enough to speak out on this story. We believe that this lady is in danger. We believe that the Scottish police are failing to protect her. We believe that there is some form of conspiracy within the Scottish establishment, that she should be victimised to this extent, and she should now be continually worried for the safety of her children, who, like her, have been subjected to physical and mental abuse. The abuser still remains free. If we're to do something about this, and if we're to help both Elaine and other cases where mothers and fathers are being abused by the system instead of protected, then we need to do something. If you've watched the programme this evening and you're concerned, if you would like to do something, then ultimately the person responsible for the continued safety and well-being of this lady is the Chief Constable of Fife Constabulary, and we have a picture of the Chief Constable Andrew Barker on screen, and we will now give you contact details. It's up to you. If you feel concerned, if you feel that you would like to help ensure this lady remains safe and well and is able to live in peace with her children, then we need to get public services to act, whether they are north of the border or south of the border. So here are the contact details for Fife Police. If you should decide to contact them, they know perfectly well who this lady is. We've withheld some details to protect her at the moment, as she is in such a vulnerable position. But please, we would ask that any action or contact you take is appropriate, is polite, is peaceful, is reasonable, but sets out your concern for what is happening to this lady and, in fact, thousands of others like her across the country. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. Please pass the video on to your friends, and I hope that, like you, you'll be prepared to take a simple piece of action to try and restore justice to this wonderful country. Thank you very much.